Thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for coming. On behalf of the President, we're really excited to have a full house today. For those of you who I've not met, I'm Jeff Zients. I'm the Federal Chief Performance Officer, and I also serve as the Deputy Director for Management at OMB. Let me start with introductions. A face that all of you know, Vivek Kundra, the Federal CIO, Dan Poneman, who is the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Energy, Roger Baker, who's Assistant Secretary and CIO at the VA, Richard Spires, who's the CIO at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes giving you some framing remarks, and then we are going to open it up for discussion with the panel. And in between that, actually, I'll turn it over to Vivek, who will do a very brief update on the significant progress we're making across government on our IT reform agenda, and then we'll do the panel discussion. My job as Chief Performance Officer, and the job of all of my colleagues across government, is to make the federal government work as well as the best performing organizations in the world. And the truth is, in many ways, the government has fallen behind. And this too often results in taxpayer dollars being wasted. And that's something that shouldn't be tolerated in any time, but especially now, given our fiscal situation. The President has made cutting waste and getting the most from taxpayer dollars a top priority. It's why he created my job and why he's pushed us since day one to find places such as IT where we can cut waste and boost performance. Let's look at productivity. As we all know, a productivity boom has transformed private sector performance over the past 3 decades. You can see it here in this graphic. Private sector productivity has risen by an average of 1.5% year over year. These productivity gains are familiar to all of us. Improvements in operations and technology that have transformed entire industries. Unfortunately, when it comes to productivity, the federal government hasn't kept up. You can see it in the second line here. From the mid-1980s through mid-90s, public sector productivity rose by less than 0.5% per year, about 1/3 as much as the private sector. In 1995, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, ironically as part of a cost-cutting move, stopped tracking the data. But the best analysis we have here actually comes from McKinsey, and it suggests that the public sector productivity since 95, since we stopped tracking it, has continued to fall further and further behind the private sector. Now, there are definitely places where the government's getting it right, as some state and local governments and some federal agencies have been able to achieve real productivity gains. Our job is to get the whole federal government to make this kind of progress so that we can create a government that's more productive, more efficient and effective, and delivers better service to its customers, the American people. To do so, we're focused on the areas that have the greatest need and opportunity for improvement. We've curbed uncontrollable growth in contract spending. Last year, we actually decreased total contracting across the government by nearly $15 billion. This is the first year-over-year decrease in total contracting in the last 13 years. We're also tackling improper payments. These are the tens of billions of dollars in erroneous payment the government makes each year. Payments to the wrong person, or at the wrong time, or in the wrong amount. We're bringing these improper payments down by deploying the same kind of cutting-edge fraud detection tools and audits that have been so successfully used by the private sector. Last year, we recaptured $700 million in improper payments and avoided billions more. We've also taken action to free up the billions of dollars tied up in the thousands of buildings and properties that the government owns but no longer needs. We're executing against a goal to save $3 billion by 2012. And just last month, we proposed to establish an independent board that will send recommendations to Congress on bundles of properties to sell, and then Congress would take an up or down vote. We estimate that this new approach would save us another $15 billion over 3 years. And most relevant to today's discussion, over the past 2 years, we've conducted in-depth, nuts and bolts reviews of more than 50 high-priority federal IT projects. We've terminated some projects altogether, and we've streamlined others. Overall, we've cut delivery time in half, and we've reduced the budget for these projects by $3 billion and counting. Even more importantly, we've begun to transform how the government buys and manages IT. Doing so is our highest priority because it's critical for everything else we need to get done. Remember those private sector productivity gains? They've been largely driven by technology. IT has been used to lower costs while at the same time improving service and boosting customer satisfaction. Take a look at how technology has driven down the cost of processing customer transactions. This slide shows the average cost per transaction for a sample of Fortune 500 companies. On average, telephone transactions that involve a customer service rep cost $5 each, while those that are completed using interactive voice systems are only about $1. And on the far right, you see that transactions completed online cost just 10 cents. Needless to say, across the billions of transactions conducted by these companies, the cost savings are enormous. Of course, it doesn't help to save money if you aren't serving your customers well. So it's important to understand that these cost savings don't come at the expense of customer satisfaction. Here you see a breakdown of customer preferences for accessing services online versus by the telephone. As you can see, for customers under age 50, there's actually a preference for web-based self-service. 55% of these customers prefer using the web. And even for people over age 50, those you would expect to be a little slower to adopt new technology solutions, more than 40% now actually express a preference for the web. So there's a clear opportunity to adopt lower-cost service approaches while still satisfying your customers. This makes sense. After all, who misses having to wait in line at the airport to get a boarding pass? And who misses rushing to your local bank branch during those very limited banking hours to wait in line to find out how low your available balance is? So we're all familiar with how technology has completely transformed how companies interact with their customers, increasing satisfaction while lowering cost. Just like large corporations, the government processes countless transactions, but too few agencies have effectively modernized their customer interactions. So the public still accesses most government services by standing in line, waiting on hold, or by filling out paper-based forms. As a result, we're too often 0 for 2. Costs are too high, and customer service lags behind. Now, there are exceptions. Some agencies have taken action and are doing really good things. Take the IRS. In 2001, 70% of all tax returns were filed on paper, and only 30% were filed electronically. Now that ratio has flipped, and this year 70% of tax returns will be transmitted and processed electronically. This represents a very meaningful change in the IRS cost structure. You can see it here. An electronic transaction costs the IRS 17 cents to process, 5% of what it costs to process a paper return. Even after taking into account the investments the IRS has made in technology, this shift represents hundreds of millions of dollars in cost savings. And just as importantly, taxpayers are better served. The customer satisfaction for e-filers is much higher than for paper filers. And the IRS isn't alone. The Department of Veteran Affairs is now using technology to decrease the time it takes to process veterans' disability claims. The VA's new fast-track system, which Roger can tell us more about, accepts online submission of applications, enables physicians to submit clinical evaluations electronically, and allows VA claims processors to achieve faster turnaround times with greater accuracy. This dramatically improves experience for our veterans, while at the same time lowering VA's costs. The work being done by the IRS, the VA, and other pioneering agencies is very encouraging. They've proven that the government can lower costs and increase customer service. But we need to do more of this across all of government agencies. To that end, this morning the President issued an executive order that directs agencies to redouble efforts to leverage technology to increase productivity and service quality. The President has made it clear that now, more than ever, we need to make every taxpayer dollar count. But he's also been clear that agencies cannot fall into the trap of viewing decreased funding levels as an excuse for the status quo or for accepting diminished service levels. Instead, the President is challenging agencies to do what the private sector has done, to do more with less, and to increase productivity by lowering costs and improving service at the same time. The President is calling on agencies to modernize their operations, streamline their processes, and use technology to increase the value they deliver to the American people. To make sure we make rapid, tangible progress here, within 6 months, every agency must establish a signature initiative using technology to transform customer service. Initiatives similar to the ones I just mentioned at the IRS and VA. And to keep us accountable for improving service across the board, today's guidance also calls for agencies to develop customer service plans that adopt best practices from the private sector, including committing to clear customer service standards and communicating them to the public, soliciting customer feedback on a real-time basis and using that feedback to make continuous service improvements, and streamlining and consolidating the more than 20,000 websites currently maintained by federal agencies. Before I turn this over to Vivek, I want to close where I started, with the productivity gap. While the federal government lags far behind, and it would clearly be better if we didn't find ourselves in this position, I think there's actually a hidden opportunity here. I like to think of it as the federal government's late mover advantage. Because the government is behind, the potential for upside is substantial. And the way to capture the upside is clear. We can learn from what works and what doesn't work in other sectors. We can avoid the costs and inefficiencies of earlier stage technologies by leapfrogging them altogether. We can adopt proven best practices and state-of-the-art solutions. This late mover advantage gives me real optimism that we can continue to improve productivity and save money across government. Let me now turn it to Vivek. He's going to update us on the significant progress we're making in transforming the way the government buys, manages, and deploys information technology. Let me also introduce Kathleen Merrigan, who just joined us.
Sorry to be late.
No. She's the deputy at AG. Vivek. Right.
Good afternoon. Since we last were here together, it was actually on December the 9th, 2010. 139 days later, what I'd like to do is update you on our progress so far. What I'm excited to announce today is that if you look at where we are in terms of execution, on 7 of the items, we've actually already delivered as part of the 25-point plan. On 5 of them, we're actually on track in terms of making sure we're going to deliver by June 9th with 41 days left. And 2 of them, we're a little behind schedule. And the 2 items, we're actually working very closely with Congress to make sure that we're lining up budgets with modular development and also consolidating commodity IT under departmental CIOs, which is central to making sure that we're driving these reforms aggressively. What I'd like to share with you today are highlights around 3 main areas. Number 1, our efforts on consolidating duplicative data centers. Number 2, what we're doing to shift from an asset ownership mentality to a service provisioning mentality by leveraging cloud computing. And number 3, what we're doing to streamline governance and drive accountability across the entire federal government. I'm pleased to announce that we're shutting down 137 data centers from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the Department of Defense to the Department of Labor. We're cracking down on duplicative, underutilized assets across the federal government. If you look at this proliferation of data centers, we went from 432 data centers in 1998 to more than 2,000 this year. And if you look at the demand side, in the next 5 years, the government as a whole is going to create more content that's born digital than since the beginning of the founding of this nation. I'll give you one data point. The National Archives literally receives 1 billion pieces of paper. This is historical content that it has to scan and archive. Yet, as we generate more content via video and emails and what we're doing through blogs, the demand for compute and storage is going to grow exponentially. Yet, if you look at our asset utilization right now, the average utilization on those 2,000 plus data centers of those servers is under 27%. What's worse is storage utilization is actually under 40%. We've already shut down 39 of these data centers, and by the end of this year, 98 more will be shut down. The aggregate in terms of square footage, this equals to about 325,000 square feet of data center space, which is about 5.5 football fields. Imagine 5.5 football fields filled with servers and networks and routers and switches consuming energy and requiring cooling. And it poses a huge security threat from a cybersecurity perspective because, as you recall, when we went out to inventory data centers, agencies first thought they had 1,100 and quickly found 1,000 more, which represents a huge security threat in terms of accurate asset counts. Here's an example of a data center that we're shutting down in Rockville, Maryland. This is 14,992 square feet. The electricity costs alone are $1.2 million of this single data center. And there are 218 racks across the board. And what the Department of Health and Human Services was able to do is move those applications to assets they already owned, rather than having to go out there and build yet another data center. Second, our progress to date on cloud first. As many of you know, we released the federal cloud computing strategy in February of this year that identified approximately $20 billion worth of systems that could potentially move to the cloud. What I want to share with you today is in 4 specific areas where we believe we're going to be able to eliminate duplication and lower the cost of government operations. First, if you look at email collaboration, we're already seeing 15 agencies that have identified 950,000 email boxes across 100 email systems that are going to move to the cloud. GSA on May 10th is going to release a $2.5 billion procurement to try to consolidate this. This represents a huge opportunity for everybody who's in this room to aggressively compete for this new business in the cloud space and provide the government with the best value and the most innovative technologies. Second, if you look at infrastructure, the Department of Justice is looking to consolidate and provide a single platform for storage across 250 offices serving 18,000 U.S. attorneys across the country. USDA is looking at workflow solutions in trying to figure out how do they rationalize the 20-plus document and correspondence systems that they have into a single cloud implementation. And this does not even include the hundreds of back office systems when you look at HR systems and financial systems that are going to move to the cloud. This represents billions of dollars in opportunities as we aggressively move to the cloud in a safe and secure manner. The third area where we've executed is actually around how we streamline governance and improve accountability. If you looked at the efforts that Jeff pointed out, the $3 billion in savings as a result of what we were doing from a governance perspective, whether it was the IT dashboard or the tech set sessions or the financial reviews that we did over the summer, we've actually taken those tools and we've productized them. And what I mean by productizing them is we've open sourced the IT dashboard and the tech stat model, and we've trained hundreds of people across the federal government that are now focused on turning around these underperforming projects. Already, over 80 agencies have conducted tech stat sessions, and we've already seen a significant effort in terms of accelerating deliverables, cutting down times to deploy meaningful functionality from 24-plus months to actually 6 months. We've also seen some halts that Roger will talk about. We're also revamping the way we actually track IT investment, not just at an investment level, but actually at the most atomic level, which is the specific project. And we're moving towards the golden source of data. We're providing real-time data on how these projects are managed. And you're going to see, as part of our budget processes, a fundamental change on the IT dashboard where you have much more granular detail on how contracts are awarded and also the health of these projects. And lastly, what's happening here is that we're able to scale across the public sector. 38 states have reached out and are interested in implementing the tech stat model and the IT dashboard platform, and countries across the world are looking at these models to scale them across the board. As we look at the next steps in the coming 6 to 12 months and 12 to 18 months, we're going to be as focused when it comes to execution, and we're as determined to make sure that we deliver on the 25-point plan, whether it's making sure that we're creating a government-wide marketplace for data centers, all the way down to making sure that we're rolling out this tech set session at every single bureau in the federal government. But what I want to share here is that this is not a product of just all of us who are on the stage here. This is a product of government officials on the front lines and the deputy secretaries and the CIOs across the federal government. It is not dependent on a single individual or an office, but it's the product of the hard work that's happening by government officials across the board. Thank you very much, and we're very, very excited to be executing on the remaining action items on the 25-point plan.
Thank you, Vivek, and I'm gonna pick up right where you left off, which is where the real action is at the agency level, and we are lucky to have 4 leading agency officials here who are really driving change. So Vivek and I are in the lucky position of coordinating and facilitating, but the heavy lifting, the real results are happening at the agency level. Why don't we start with you, Dan?
Thank you, Jeff. And first, I just have to salute you, Jeff, and Vivek for the incredible thought leadership. Jeff has just proved one of the truisms of Washington, D.C., which is amazing how much you can get done when you give someone else the credit, because the vision for the change, obviously emanating from the president, but channeled through Jeff and Vivek has been outstanding through their work at the President's Management Council. And there's no time like the present. As Jeff was quoting the president, now more than ever, we need to make every taxpayer dollar count. We feel that keenly at the Department of Energy. We feel that we are confronting some of our greatest challenges in terms of trying to drive innovation so we can outbuild and out-innovate the world in developing clean energy solutions, and we're doing it in frankly, the most straitened possible circumstances. We do deeply feel every day in every way we need to make every dollar count, and that's why when I read the 25-point plan, which actually reads very well, that Vivek went, it was so redolent with common sense that it was clearly something we needed to do. And so it was a mandate, but it was something we embraced to take right off the top of the list of 25 initiatives, the cloud initiative, and we have aggressively moved to the cloud. We've done that with our public key infrastructure. We've done that with energy.gov. We've done that with financial assistance models, and I wanted to just focus my comments here on what we've done in cloud. That was what I think would be most helpful because it does provide a number of important benefits to the department and to our functions and how we can effectively and efficiently carry out the mission we are trying to support the president. It provides us with more flexibility, allowing us quickly to add resources to meet our immediate demands. It affords efficient scalability so that we can grow our operations over time. It offers mobility, and this is very important as we're trying to get a workforce restructuring, which Jeff is also spearheading, so that our employees can access their resources regardless of their physical location. And one of the great frustrations, frankly, that we have had historically is these are not 9-to-5 jobs. We're thinking all the time we want to be accommodating of our workforce need to work out of the home and the efficiencies we can achieve that way. And we have certain people who just can't stop thinking, and when they're at home, they want to be able to access the cloud, and it's already proving very, very beneficial. And of course, and not to be forgotten, is cost, allowing us to reduce our operating costs while adding functionality, capability, and other virtues to our IT system. So I could go, but I shouldn't go on and on about it. I'm going to talk about two specific places we're moving to the cloud, both of which I have personally browsed around and experimented with, and how we do this to enable our cutting-edge, energy-efficient IT technologies, both with respect to our own internal functioning within the department, and something we learned from Steve Ballmer when he came and spoke to the President's Management Council. We have to look to our own productivity first, but also in those elements of the department where we're facing out to the broader community, which I will return to in a moment. As many of you know, we have 17 major national laboratories. Some of them are dedicated to science, some of them are dedicated to national security, some are dedicated to applied energy. At the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in Berkeley, California, where I know Vivek had a chance to visit recently, we have transitioned all of our calendar and email operations for approximately 5,000 users to Google Apps, which will save $1.5 to $2 million over the next 5 years. The important thing, I think, when we're talking about these savings is, although Aristotle did say goodness is its own reward, there's a much more immediate payoff, which is the money that we save out of these back office operations go right into mission, go right into muscle and sinew. And we were here at this very stage yesterday with Deputy Secretary of Defense Bill Lynn talking about how in energy cooperation we can improve our tooth-to-tail ratio in fuel and more efficient applications of energy and electrical vehicles. This is equally true here, and in fact the scale of this, which we are experiencing across the federal government, is very, very impressive and it's profoundly important. The thing that impressed me yesterday when I was online with our Lawrence Berkeley Lab colleagues was how quickly and effectively we could collaborate on any problem that we might come up with. And in a government and in an agency sometimes thought of as stovepiped, where you have sometimes walls between people that make collaboration difficult, to be able to get online, immediately set up a chat session, create within about 3 or 4 keystrokes your own URL, You could have open to third parties to begin to come into a solution set. If you're trying to find a more efficient glazing for a window, you could immediately access the data. Very simple, cost-effective collaboration. You could then save your work, make it available for third party, fourth party, fifth party. Indeed, the scalability of the thing is one of its most powerful attributes. And the way all of these functions in the cloud interacted was very impressive. Within 4 or 5 minutes of this session, which we used a hypothetical problem to kind of drive our communications, we were going through Google Docs, sites, groups, video chat, live chat. All of this, I can only imagine, once you found a way to measure it, would have a profoundly positive effect on our productivity. And again, if we're going to meet the President's mandate, I think that's exactly what we need to do. The other thing that I saw, which I think it's interesting, so if you think of the Lawrence Berkeley example of one where you have a lot of inward collaboration within Lawrence Berkeley Lab, but also within the wider DOE community of the other national laboratories and people out at DOE headquarters, then we have other kinds of programs. Under the Recovery Act in 2009, we had a very big charge. We had to work very hard to take the $32+ billion that were entrusted to the department by the American taxpayers to try to drive some economic recovery. At the same time, we were trying to drive energy efficiency. We had certain very big mandates, for example, the weatherization of hundreds of thousands of homes. And so immediately you face a massive training problem. Well, you start to think traditionally, how do I train the trainers? How do we find, go out to workplaces, get out and have a job fair, and it could take weeks just to get people the information on how to help somebody learn how to weatherize their house. On the other hand, if you have a cloud application, as we have now developed, the National Training Education Resource, which we call ENTER, we love acronyms, which is a free, open source, interactive training infrastructure that relies on cloud computing resources. It makes it all one step. And it's infinitely scalable. You can go all over the country. I went into this thing. It's 3D. You're in the rafters of the attic. You're seeing where to put the insulation in a graphic way. I cannot imagine it could be better explained. And of course, unlike a human being, a computer is infinitely patient. So even somebody like I could figure it out. I have to go over 2 or 3 times, but I could get it eventually. And while this application was originally developed for the weatherization program and to help the efficiency of our workers nationwide, we are now looking at it as a much more muscular tool to advance our training objectives all across the department. A couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to see in another aspect of our operations where we have nuclear reactors embedded in submarines. You have people who are training in those submarines every day, day and night. They're running around the clock on interactive models, and there's no place where you want to have a more online, interactive, user-friendly place than when you've got somebody who's responsible for the safety of the operation of a nuclear reactor. And if this particular app hasn't been put into that particular machine yet, I'm sure that it soon will be. Educators and users alike can share training materials across federal agencies. As I said, this is outward looking. We can share it with community colleges. We can share it with universities. We can allow all kinds of peer-to-peer exchanges through that mechanism. And, of course, saving perhaps the best or one of the best features for last, you only pay for what you use. And so you can ramp it up, you can ramp it down, and because it runs on that subscription basis, it's not only a very powerful training tool, which, as I said, I can think of no limit to the applications looking into the future when you think of things we're going to be doing in green technology and electrical vehicles. The list goes on and on. A very powerful tool, and yet one that can help us achieve the President's mission to make sure that we're making the most out of every taxpayer dollar, because at the end of the day, we must be the best stewards we can be in the environment we're dealing with, the budgetary constraints that we're dealing with, and I think that the powerful tool of cloud computing is one that I think will really help us get to the place we need to be.
Thank you, Dan. Deputy Secretary Merrigan.
Deputy Secretary Merrigan. So I'd like to start by giving you a little context for USDA. You've all been to the National Mall, I'm sure. USDA has a footprint on that mall. We're in the corner building, 3 big buildings, as a matter of fact. If you've not been to USDA before, come visit. We're a great place. But the reality is, most of our employees are out in the field. We are a 120,000 person department. In the metro area here, only about 25,000 folk are situated. We have close to 100 international offices. We have offices in every state, many county offices in remote areas. That's an important context to understand our overall IT initiative at USDA and why it's so important. So Vivek already explained that we're very involved in this data center consolidation. So we have a plan, we have a scheme where we are going to migrate our business systems from 43 agency and staff office data centers around the world into 7 enterprise data centers. And as his bar chart showed, in this calendar year, we will be closing down 10 of our centers along with 8 smaller server rooms. Why is this important? I'm going to join the choir here. It's very important from an efficiency sake. So increased efficiency and performance comes about by leveraging economies of scale, obviously, through the use of these enterprise systems and working to address common business challenges. Second, the cybersecurity issue has already been raised. We're improving security by doing this, and that is a high priority for this administration. Our new EDCs are certified secure by the Department of Justice, and we're always keeping an eye on that prize. Dan said it well. In this town these days, it's a lot of budget talk, so there's this big money component to it. We expect to see reduced costs through our utilities bills, lower capital investments, and we'll save by eliminating support resources for dozens of these small non-enterprise data centers that we currently have. And finally, frosting on the cake, there's a green component to this, right? We're trying to become greener in our information technology as we go forward here, taking advantage of virtual infrastructure where applicable and using modern, state-of-the-art, high-efficiency facilities. All good. We're also really working on this email thing. We have a real challenge here. We are working to move our 120,000 employees, our emails into a single cloud solution. Not easy, but it's going to be so important. Right now, we have about 17,000 employees that have moved into this new cloud-based email system. We're migrating about 1,600 people a night. We hope it will all be done by the end of the calendar year. And as Dan said, that's really important because our employees now will be able to have this integrated email system. They'll have instant messaging, web conferencing capabilities that they don't have. They'll have a robust and appropriate employee directory. So it's very, very exciting. Why am I here? I brought my iPad as a prop. I mean, I am not the IT guru. I just want to do a shout out to my CIO, Chris Smith, his deputy and team, who are obviously the masterminds of this. Why am I here? Because I'm the deputy, and I have to oversee the day-to-day management of the department and achieve our missions. And right now, to underscore what my colleague says, we have silos of people working. And the customers that come to our offices, that are farmers and ranchers, they don't understand all these different systems and why it works that way. And our employees, they don't understand either, and they're begging for this. They know this is the right way to go, and we are making progress. So, Jeff, thanks, Vivek, thank you for your leadership. It's moving fast, and we're excited about it.
Thank you, Kathleen. Roger, the VA.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, across government, CIOs are implementing the TechStat process, part of the 25-point plan, to review the IT programs that have performance issues. And I, too, want to give a shout-out to all the fellow CIOs in the room that are actively pursuing that process and doing a great job of it. The primary focus of the TechStat process really is to ensure that we do a better job of delivering the automation systems, as Jeff pointed out, that are critical to improving the government's performance overall in its business processes. Under Secretary Shinseki at VA, we were early adopters of the strong IT disciplines that this administration has pursued, including the TechStat process. So for 2010, those strong IT disciplines saved about $200 million of the VA's IT budget. Probably more importantly than the savings, though, As a result of the disciplines, nearly 80% of our IT projects now meet their scheduled delivery milestones, and that's up from about 30% 2 years ago when we came in. That means that we've successfully delivered over 250 customer-facing milestones over the last year, including the new GI Bill system, now paying billions of dollars to keep veterans in school. And so far, meeting all the milestones on the IT system that will transform the veterans benefits process completely and into a completely paper process. Now, I want to talk about TxStat. One example of the discipline there, we've recently paused what we call our Strategic Asset Management Program, or the SAM program. When the SAM program missed its milestone for completing user testing in December, at the VA, missing a user-facing milestone is an automatic opportunity to meet with the Assistant Secretary. At that meeting, we determined that the project also would not meet its next milestone date, and that was for production testing, before it was ready to go into production. The last milestone miss also met our criteria that we call strike 3. Fairly easy to figure out. In that rule, that causes us to consider whether we should continue the program or not. And in this case, we decided not to. We decided the probability was that it would not stay on track, it would not get back on track. We determined that the appropriate action was to stop project development, or pause it in our vernacular, and terminate three of the largest contracts on that program. That action by itself will produce a savings of about $11 million for the second half of 2011. Now, we expect to restart the asset management program at some point in the future. We still have a requirement for modernized logistics and asset management, in particular, in our 153 major hospitals throughout the country. But when we restart asset management, we'll restart it under a new plan. We will follow the guidance of Einstein. Einstein said that the definition of insanity is following the same process over and over and expecting different results. So to get different results, we will find a different process to deliver asset management. But most importantly, we will look to deliver the capabilities that we need at VA more effectively, more efficiently, and more reliably under that new plan. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Richard, Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to speak about one of my passions, which is IT best practices, and I'm very pleased to do so. I came into the federal government after 20 years in the private sector, all in the IT field. And first in the IRS, and I appreciate the compliment to the IRS that Jeff gave earlier, and then now at the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the things that was striking to me about coming into the government was the fact that as a CIO at IRS for a while, I just couldn't figure out where to go to find out who had done really excellent work, where those best practices resided, how I could leverage them. It just wasn't there, or it certainly wasn't there for me, and I looked hard. And I think that is a real issue for us. And I've been honored to step up now to the vice chair of the Federal CIO Council, and I'm taking it on myself as my challenge is to make sure that, one, we support the implementation of this 25-point plan because I believe in it so much, and two, that we truly build a community of IT community so that we have the collaboration and we know where to go to get help and to get the right kinds of tools and templates and guidance to be able to implement successful IT. I think that's very, very key to the federal government and doing better in delivering IT for the American public. So how do we go about identifying some of these best practices and approach that? Well, we've already really begun in earnest, as Vivek pointed out. One of the things I'm a big believer in, go find excellence. Go study excellence, right? And we're doing that. If you go to CIO.gov right now and /best practices, you're going to find 5 case studies that have been vetted. A number of us have been looking across the government at a number of case studies, and have picked so far these 5 to actually showcase, not just internally, but also externally to the public. All right? Just to give you a sense for a couple of those, Frank Bateman, CIO at the Social Security Administration, has done a wonderful job, him and his team, in establishing a true program management track, not just about school learning, but real-world experience and mentorship on how you do this, and the results are showing for Social Security. Susan Schwartz, CIO at the State Department, a very innovative working capital fund arrangement. A lot of us in federated models trying to drive enterprise solutions have lots of problems, if you will, pulling the dollars together in a way to be able to implement these enterprise solutions. And I was really appreciative of what Susan and her team is doing at State Department. But we're doing a lot more than just identifying these case studies. We're starting to really drive this. And I'm pleased that the Management Best Practices Committee, we've got 3 really top-notch leaders. Chris Smith, who was already mentioned earlier, is the CIO at Agriculture, Mike Lakaitis, CIO at Energy, and Terry Takai, CIO at DOD, have all stepped up to really drive management best practices. And that really, if you will, transcends or crosses all the 25-point plan, right? Everywhere we're trying to implement, find these best practices and leverage them so that we can all use them. Another area, it was mentioned by both Vivek and Deputy Secretary Amerigan, the Data Center Consolidation Initiative. I'm on the task force that's looking to drive that. What are we dealing with? We're really dealing with, at a more working level, what are the best practices that we can use to help each other, okay? DHS has been doing this for a number of years. We have had a number of workshops already where we've brought, if you will, practitioners from across the federal government who are responsible for data center consolidation in their own agency together to be able to share lessons learned and best practices. That's what I mean by community, by true collaboration. And it's really starting to work. As the CIO of DHS, I'm very excited about this. We need help too, right? I mean, we have pockets of excellence in DHS, and we're trying to our best and are working on replicating the model that Vivek is driving at the federal government level here within DHS, okay? Repositories of best practices, the collaboration model, which really starting to work, and bringing things back to the whole community around things we're doing with enterprise software licensing, for example, and the data center consolidation work. It's an exciting time to be part of this, and I'm very honored to be part of the team helping implement the 25-point plan. Thank you,
Richard. Let's open it up for a few questions. There's a mic that's going to... Who's got the mic?
Good afternoon. Tim Young with Deloitte. Congratulations on the progress. It's great, refreshing to see the interagency collaboration, particularly the support from the President's Management Council. My question relates to the enduring nature of this plan, and more specifically, what the enforcement plan is to make sure that it becomes reality.
So part of what we've tried to do across the board, if you look at how the plan was developed from day one, it wasn't a product of some OMB mandate that was hatched behind 4 walls. It was actually a product of engaging Congress, engaging the CIO community, the vendor community, many of you have contributed to it. Second, what we've done is we are hardwiring it across the federal government. And as you can see, what Jeff has said in terms of the President's Management Council, the Deputy Secretaries here, the CIO community, and also, if you look in the audience, we've got Dave Powner from GAO, and we've got representation from various senators and congressmen who are here. The key there is it's the entire IT community, the entire ecosystem that's driving this direction. It's going to have to be sustainable, too, because we're in a fiscal environment where we cannot afford the old ways of doing business where we're wasting billions of dollars.
I might just add, I think a lot of it's going to depend not on enforcement from above, but the tools that I have seen, the results sell themselves, and people are going to be happier and working better and saving. It's actually, Jeff put the statistics up there. You get lower cost and higher satisfaction. So I think that's when you get the momentum that you need to build it into the DNA of the organization.
But I think you're agreeing with everything that Vivek and Dan just said. You're calling out the right question in that the plan is really just the beginning. Yeah. and it's all about the execution. And I think you're seeing today really good execution, but it's just maybe a third of the way through the plan at most. So hold us accountable for the next 2/3 and then the next set of reforms after that. And it's all about us delivering, this group at the agency level, delivering results and building momentum. Here.
Thank you very much. John Weiler here from the IT Acquisition Advisory Council. I will give it back, I promise. We had a meeting yesterday covering some of your points, and it's nice to see, the dedication of the team here, driving these. And one of the things that the innovators are asking for through the ITAC is some mechanism by which they can present things that they have created outside of a formal procurement process. If they have innovated and they're not huge organizations, it's very hard to reach people like you. And they were hoping to recreate mechanisms that existed back in the 90s, something called Highway 1, or you had the Council for Excellence in Government. Some of these organizations that are nonprofits have disappeared because we outsourced everything over the past 10 years. Is there an interest in bringing back in some of the concepts that proved as effective ways of exposing innovations in the market to the government acquisition process before you get into the acquisition process? Is there an interest in that? I was just curious. Thank you.
Let me go first, and then Vivek, you can fill in. I think overall, absolutely. It's what we called that late mover advantage. We're not interested in reinventing the wheel here. So where there are proven technologies that we can adopt or lessons that we can learn, as Richard said, both within government and outside government, we're very open. And we want to make sure that we are doing that on a regular basis. So, Vivek, maybe you have a few words on how we might institutionalize this.
Absolutely. So one of the ways we're doing it is actually we've assigned a full-time person within the Federal CIO Council. Adam Sedgwick, I don't know where he is. Adam, if you could stand up, he's right there. And I understand he was actually at your event yesterday. And part of what Adam is trying to do is to identify and matchmake between demand and supply, especially when it's game-changing from an innovation perspective. Second thing we're doing as part of our reform agenda is we're building out a pre-RFP platform. So before procurements even go out, that the vendor community can weigh in and provide the buyers across the board with potential solutions that they can look at so they can inform their procurements.
Other questions? Here and then, okay, you're next.
Thank you. Brian Flora with Beyond 20. Through a lot of these, a lot of your presentations, and particularly Richard's at the end, I heard a lot of mention of best practices and that term, and best management practices and best practices for IT. Can you shed a little light on what the sources for those best practices are, and if there are particular frameworks that are particularly in vogue right now, or where
Richard?
you're going with that?
Sure. I mean, it's one of those things where what I have found, there are many best practices, right? And you can get into debates about what's appropriate. What's interesting about the federal government, having also worked quite a bit in the commercial side, is that what I have found is we need practical, implemental things that work in the federal government, right? And so it's bringing in the right kinds of practices and trialing them as appropriate and getting them to work in the federal government. And I think many organizations in the federal government have done that, okay, very well. So it's not that we now say we don't need the private sector. We absolutely continue, and I thought that last question was good, right? We need to continue to infuse ourselves. But I'm also very big on looking across the federal government, who's doing something very well already that we can then leverage. Because, as Jeff said, the last thing I want to do is build something that's already been built or develop a process for something that we already have a good process for somewhere in the federal government. I want to adopt those as quickly as I can and get them out for reuse across the whole IT community. So I don't know if it's so much an issue that we have to go to a specific framework or specific set of practices. It's more about finding what works well in our environment and then leveraging that.
Last question from the gentleman in the purple here.
Hi, Craig Wolf from Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw Pittman. Two of the drivers that you mentioned of the productivity and cost efficiency are the move to the cloud and collaboration tools, which are part of that. But inherently, the more you collaborate in the cloud itself present enormous cybersecurity risks and challenges. I'd just be interested if somebody could talk for a minute about what you're doing to address those, and if there were any other particular challenges that you faced in terms of dealing with a rapid move to the cloud.
So Kathleen, do you want to take us deep? That's a joke.
So a couple of things. One of the things we've done is that we've actually published our approach to cloud computing. This is what we put out there in February. I would actually argue that for some weird reason also that the risks are being overly hyped. And what I mean by that is if you look at the current state of the federal government, there are over 4,700 systems that have already been outsourced. So these are systems that the government isn't operating. They're in the hands of companies like Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and so forth. So when you look at cloud computing, part of what we have to do is we need to make sure as CIOs are making these decisions on a case-by-case basis, on a mission basis, that they're evaluating risk as they would any other platform. The other thing that's happening is that a lot of the suppliers, in terms of cloud providers, have actually stood up .gov solutions that are FISMA certified, that are secure in nature. So I understand what you're saying in terms of some of the risks, but I think the agencies are being very mindful of making sure that they're moving to the cloud in a very safe, secure manner, rather than just haphazardly moving in that direction.
Does anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, I think Vivek hit on, to me, the key point. No matter what we do, no matter where we move our computing, from a protection of veterans' information, I own it. And I think every CIO in the federal government takes that view of, leaning forward, adapting these things, but also being careful in the ultimate goal of we have to protect that information for our clients and for citizens around the country.
I want to thank Dan, Kathleen, Roger, and Richard for both carving out the time today, but even more importantly, being pioneers and really leading and showing that things can change and doing exactly what you described, lowering costs and increasing quality and cybersecurity all at once. So thank you for doing your work. And thank all of you for coming. Thank you. That's something that shouldn't be tolerated in any time, but especially now, given our fiscal situation. The President has made cutting waste and getting the most from taxpayer dollars a top priority. It's why he created my job and why he's pushed us since day one to find places such as IT where we can cut waste and boost performance. Let's look at productivity. As we all know, a productivity boom has transformed private sector performance over the past 3 decades. You can see it here in this graphic. Private sector productivity has risen by an average of 1.5% year over year. These productivity gains are familiar to all of us. Improvements in operations and technology that have transformed entire industries. Unfortunately, when it comes to productivity, the federal government hasn't kept up. You can see it in the second line here. From the mid-1980s through mid-90s, public sector productivity rose by less than 0.5% per year, about 1/3 as much as the private sector. In 1995, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, ironically, as part of a cost-cutting move, stopped tracking the data. But the best analysis we have here actually comes from McKinsey, and it suggests that the public sector productivity since '95, since we stopped tracking it, has continued to fall further and further behind the private sector. Now, there are definitely places where the government's getting it right, as some state and local governments and some federal agencies have been able to achieve real productivity gains. Our job is to get the whole federal government to make this kind of progress so that we can create a government that's more productive, more efficient and effective, and delivers better service to its customers, the American people. To do so, we're focused on the areas that have the greatest need and opportunity for improvement. We've curbed uncontrollable growth in contract spending. Last year, we actually decreased total contracting across the government by nearly $15 billion. This is the first year-over-year decrease in total contracting in the last 13 years. We're also tackling improper payments. These are the tens of billions of dollars in erroneous payment the government makes each year. Payments to the wrong person, or at the wrong time, or in the wrong amount. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for coming. On behalf of the President, we're really excited to have a full house today. For those of you who I have not met, I'm Jeff Zients. I'm the Federal Chief Performance Officer, and I also serve as the Deputy Director for Management at OMB. Let me start with introductions. A face that all of you know, Vivek Kundra, the Federal CIO, Dan Poneman, who is the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Energy, Roger Baker, who's Assistant Secretary and CIO at the VA, Richard Spires, who's the CIO at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes giving you some framing remarks, and then we are going to open it up for discussion with the panel. And in between that, actually, I'll turn it over to Vivek, who will do a very brief update on the significant progress we're making across government on our IT reform agenda, and then we'll do the panel discussion. My job as Chief Performance Officer, and the job of all of my colleagues across government, is to make the federal government work as well as the best performing organizations in the world. And the truth is, in many ways, the government has fallen behind. And this too often results in taxpayer dollars being wasted. And we're bringing these improper payments down by deploying the same kind of cutting-edge fraud detection tools and audits that have been so successfully used by the private sector. Last year, we recaptured $700 million in improper payments and avoided billions more. We've also taken action to free up the billions of dollars tied up in the thousands of buildings and properties that the government owns but no longer needs. We're executing against a goal to save $3 billion by 2012. And just last month, we proposed to establish an independent board that will send recommendations to Congress on bundles of properties to sell, and then Congress would take an up or down vote. We estimate that this new approach would save us another $15 billion over 3 years. And most relevant to today's discussion, over the past 2 years, we've conducted in-depth, nuts and bolts reviews of more than 50 high-priority federal IT projects. We've terminated some projects altogether, and we've streamlined others. Overall, we've cut delivery time in half, and we've reduced the budget for these projects by $3 billion and counting. Even more importantly, we've begun to transform how the government buys and manages IT. Doing so is our highest priority because it's critical for everything else we need to get done. Remember those private sector productivity gains? They've been largely driven by technology. IT has been used to lower costs while at the same time improving service and boosting customer satisfaction. Take a look at how technology has driven down the cost of processing customer transactions. This slide shows the average cost per transaction for a sample of Fortune 500 companies. On average, telephone transactions that involve a customer service rep cost $5 each. while those that are completed using interactive voice systems are only about $1. And on the far right, you see that transactions completed online cost just 10 cents. Needless to say, across the billions of transactions conducted by these companies, the cost savings are enormous. Of course, it doesn't help to save money if you aren't serving your customers well. So it's important to understand that these cost savings don't come at the expense of customer satisfaction. Here you see a breakdown